little box. All I had is Smart and Final.
Oh boy.
The only box I had. So this is Studio A. You're about to get toured.
So the record library is relocated like overflow.
So 2 mic, 3 turntables, 3 CD players, and
I remember when the KZSU was split with the AM and the FM and the double, so you could put commercials on the AM wired radio, no commercials on the FM.
This is a training room?
no, these are some old timers who, some of the people who built the place
You
back in
know,
the 70s.
This studio in
To
particular.
our old phone system.
no, didn't load Sibley make some of the things that he developed the console later on. He used also couplers for the tank.
Yeah, I built a console using that concept
Yeah.
back in '68. It's still back in storage.
Hey Mark, so is that the station phone that rings when someone calls in then? Over
This
there?
is the new phone. That's the old phone. I said that's the one that's on our ancient switchgear, and this is the voice over IP.
Amazing.
Can I go with that?
Opto couple trainers. If I have your pot buried, the intense power from the light bulb. Remember, 65 fans here, things like that.
New microphone.
These are actually the old microphones. I'm about to replace these with ones similar to those.
What are they?
These are AKGs. So those are high LPR 40s in there.
They're dynamics or
They're dynamic, yeah. They're pretty good mics, but they all date from the 70s.
I have a D24 sitting there somewhere.
It's about to install some mics similar to those high LPR 40s on arms mounted to the table. Not quite such fancy arms. These are the premium Yellowtech arms, which are really nice because they springs are hidden. They've got adjustable friction stops at all the joints. They're dynamic. Cardioid dynamic.
That's still the best thing?
Well, best. I mean, for voice, they're great. I mean, for super duper music reproduction, you should want a condenser mic.
So where do
For
I
human voice, there's no point, because
Yeah.
your voice is not going to killers.
Well, where do electrodes fit into the picture?
That's condenser. That's it.
So you're not talking about high voltage metallic
No,
plate type
well, condenser mics do need a voltage supply, so you should have phantom power.
Right.
Still 48.
Typically, yeah, standard power voltage is 48. So yeah, speaking of artful scrounging, this table I got for free in interdepartmental surplus. Stanford has a thing where departments with surplus property can post it on a internal website for other departments to get either free or with funds transferred. Most of the stuff that comes up there is free. Best thing I got off that list was a golf cart.
Is this some kind of conferencing phone?
This is on-air phone, and this is a voice over IP phone system that's fairly new. So yeah, this will let you put one or more callers on the air.
Multiple calls simultaneously.
Yes, you can do multiple calls simultaneously. And it uses what's known as HD voice if you're doing voice over IP phone calls, say wideband.
Yeah.
Wideband instead of emulating twisted pair copper, for bandwidth.
Right.
One of the many ironies, you know, that they made phones digital, they were careful to make sure they didn't sound any better than the old ones.
Right.
You know, it's like, why did computer terminals have 80 columns?
Well, the mere fact that they have electronic
Because that's how many is in a punch card.
the mere fact that electronic phones have an electric mic rather than a carbon makes them sound better, even with a 3
Well,
kilohertz.
yes, even if the bandwidth is limited, at
much
least
less
you've got rid of
distortion.
some scratchiness and harmonic distortion.
Yep.
But yeah, the original bandwidth was a compromise,
Yep.
and you don't really need to compromise it that way when you've got all the bandwidth of the internet to make it work, so.
Yeah, I've got a couple of wideband Polycom phones that were sent to me, but
Yeah,
who do I talk to with? Who has another end that will match?
oh, well, you can.
I don't know anyone. Yeah.
Okay, you can go to a cloud-based VoIP provider such as OnSIP, and there's a bunch of them, but onsip.com is the one I'm using.
Well, I'm just saying, I
And
don't,
you can,
I
for
don't know anybody else
very
who has
reason-
one, that's what I'm saying.
What I'm saying is you don't need to,
Why is that?
because you go to somebody like OnSip, you can get an outside phone number for like $2 a month,
Okay,
and basically for very, very modest monthly fee, you could connect that Polycom phone to using your internet connection and have it have a number that can be dialed from the public switch telephone network.
right. But what I meant was if the person at the other end doesn't have a phone of wide, high HD phone too, then the fact that you have it at one end isn't gonna make it sound any better.
That's true.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
I don't know anyone else who has one, therefore, any call I make to anyone I know is gonna still be limited to 3 kilohertz. That's what I meant.
Well, most of the
You
SIP
can call
providers
somebody
now-
using Skype perhaps and get
Well,
wideband.
Yeah, I suppose
Well,
it's true.
most of the SIP providers now support.
Right, most of the
wideband.
cloud-based VoIP providers will support HD voice. Yeah.
Right, and the font. You know,
So
is
start with
built into
yours,
the
and then
phones.
eventually you'll have somebody to talk to. It's kind of like the color TV problem, right?
Yeah, I suppose.
Well, I remember the thing that was a problem getting color TV to take off is nobody wanted to spend a fortune on a color TV set if there wasn't any color
Correct.
programming, and no network wanted to spend a fortune on color programming if there weren't any color TV sets.
So how
The
did,
problem was solved by having a network that owned a TV company, or the other way around, RCA and NBC. And so NBC committed to doing all their prime time in color, and they came up with the Peacock to say, this program's in living color. Don't you wish you had a color TV set, sucker? Because remember, a color TV set cost $500 back in the 50s, and that was pretty much the price of a cheap car.
yeah,
I mean, you know, this,
yeah.
so
And then there's all
it's hard to
this.
get people to buy color TV sets when they were so outrageously expensive.
I was like, I'm thinking
And so, well,
If you ever get the turntable there.
So we will do the programming, and then we will relentlessly count on people. You could be watching this in color.
My whole life until we got here.
And then we'll put up color TV demonstrations and people and walk by them and say, oh gosh, it's so cool to see it in color. I guess I gotta buy one of these things.
I don't know. I
Trade the
remember my
car in
first
on it.
color TV. It wasn't. The rendition was a little weak.
You had to play
Well,
with
yes.
those to make them work at all.
Okay, well, continue our tour here.
Hey Mark, I have a question.
Yeah.
So, what's up with those dial-less phones in the corner there?
Oh, they're intercom things. One get plugged in the studio, and another one in the for the live band production. They've got a mixer for the live bands in the next room, which I'll show you in a minute.
So those are still used?
Yeah. Well, one of them is to connect to some of the remote equipment, and it's not currently in use because that equipment isn't being used much.
This where all the music is?
Yeah. Or most of it anyway.
I don't remember if this room was built
Yes,
on
the music library.
No, the library. used to be
KZSU
across
has
the
about
hall. It was across
80,000
the way. That's
CDs.
right. It was a smaller room across the hall. That's
Because
right.
whenever your record company comes out with new music, they send it to the radio station and say, take our music, please.
So
Do you have any vinyl?
In vinyl form.
Yeah, well, there's vinyl too.
What that
Is,
is all vinyl.
All that
Cabinets
chain,
or CDs?
is all that chain work on the top of that rack earthquake prevention?
Yes.
Okay.
So it won't fall on you in the earthquake.
I just know that they told us we
Because
could
it
play
slides
with
out. It's not secured other than by that chain.
movie, as long as it's
So
fitting
when I
within the
work on the back, I
FCC's
hook
like.
the chain
Yeah.
and slide it out.
I mean, major stations.
Which is
have-
easier said than done
They
because,
pay a
as you can
license,
imagine,
but it's
it's
a blanket license.
got a
for,
considerable mass.
you know, play pretty
It's on
much
kind of
anything.
aluminum sled base
But
that I
they're
made,
paying
sheet aluminum.
so
and
much
stuff.
to the ASCAP or BMI when it broadcasts music.
So does anybody use that 182 phone?
Yeah, that's the old, so we're in this transition phase where I'm gradually deploying voice over IP phones and I need to sort of replicate various functions that our old system had
so it's
before I
in
could
this
retire.
station.
So we're in this kind of awkward in-between state right now. So both phones still work.
Do they both ring or just the new one?
They both ring, actually. Actually, the new one uses the old one's ringer right now.
Oh.
So
This
the,
is the music annex, which is overflow.
yeah, so it's still there.
Not to mention the ones in the hall.
Right.
So this is for the record library?
Well, this was the record library.
Actually,
Yeah.
half of this, when we went to build Studio A down here, we had to move the music library and we built a room that's half of this room. It was this door.
Big red rose bowl. Hung up on the wall there. Yeah.
Yep.
You'll see where the wall was. If you look at the bottom of the air duct, you can see where the sheetrock texturing was along there. Because that was how you got to the old Studio A upstairs.
Right.
Right.
Right, that's right. And then that was closed off
Okay, so there's stairs,
When,
there used to be a studio A upstairs.
when the new studio was built.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they didn't want us running around the
Yeah, but we have the key
rest of
to
the
it.
building. Yeah.
So there's
Actually,
just
some
stairs
years
there?
back, someone from Drama, I heard some pounding, and it turned out somebody from Drama was busy installing a hasp and padlock on the door. I ran the guy off and removed the hasp and had a few harsh words with Drama's facilities people, like, no, you don't padlock KZSU's door.
So, speaking of locks, who
Yeah.
services your best locks these days? Now the best doesn't
U.S.
exist.
Securities by in Sacramento.
Still have all the best locks.
Yes, still the best locks.
Does this phone get used?
A little, not much. I can answer the request, the old request line.
I like this.
It's a great little town.
Yeah.
Once you get a PhD in.
It's basically
So Studio B and the production room.
basically the second language acquisition.
I missed the 350s here.
Yep, no more. Yeah, well, there's a couple of Otaris here behind me for reading the old tapes. So Studio B, I renovated in 1968. And in 2008, I took a look at it and thought, you know, I did a pretty nice job on this place, but that was 40 years ago. It was time to do it again. So I did it again in 2008. And we managed to downsize the infamous box.
Oh,
So those
yes.
of you who were here at the time know about the box because
Yep.
there used to be steam pipes that ran all around. And the box there was originally built to conceal them. And if you look up at the ceiling, you can see a seam in the acoustic tile where the outside edge of that box used to be. The lower edge of it was like 6 feet above the floor. So the counter we had from 68 to 2008 ran around the corner and the console was in the corner. And so when we took out those steam pipes when we built Studio A, and in the meantime the box had air ducts added to it, so we couldn't get rid of it, but I was able to shrink it enough that you can stand under it comfortably, which made the room feel a lot bigger. So we did a major renovation of the room in 2008 and put the sound soak on the walls, as well as some quiet rock underneath it, which is a combination of gypsum board and cement board that's a lot better at stopping sound.
What happened?
Power distribution control is still there.
Yeah, the alarm lights, I have trouble keeping up with those little bulbs burning out. I really want to get rid of those.
The Ampex rack is gone.
Did you hear about they just took the Airpack sign down?
They took it down?
Yeah, but
Finally.
Stanford land where the hospital.
Yeah.
And it was in one of the local newspapers, but Stanford is putting it away and saying they're looking for somebody to, a museum or somebody, but.
Yeah, the old Ampex place.
I have three
the-
Ampexes, yeah.
So yeah, we got a couple of the reel-to-reel machines still here for reading the old tapes, and then otherwise it's computers. This mixer is used for live bands that we do in the other room, and the TV is a video camera so you can see the band. And that black intercom phone in there is to talk to the band. Or talk to the guys in there working with the band.
I have
So
about
it's not used too much.
half a dozen 7-inch reels that Ron Murphy. Do you know Ron Murphy?
Oh, yeah.
He recorded like Louis Armstrong and
Kind of
stuff.
up on top.
Yeah.
The only problem with them is, I guess it was
So those
carrier
were various
current
power
got into
settings.
the bias on these, and there's a very high frequency pitch in the background that has to be notched out.
Oh, okay.
But those are surreptitious recordings.
The old 440 kilohertz master oscillator, yes, I remember that.
Like a 22 cartridge.
Hey Mark,
Yes.
what's the white handset for?
That is connected to one of the remote broadcast things that uses, it's actually the equipment it's connected to right now is really not in use anymore. I intend to repurpose it to connect to some of the more modern equipment. It was for sports remotes, so we had some gear that could, we actually used this stuff called a Comrex Vector, and it basically is an audio codec and a modem, so it would digitize the audio and then use a modem to send it over the phone line. The point of all that is to get you more bandwidth for the audio. And now we mostly use stuff that's IP connected. And so, but the idea is you can pick up the handset and talk to the guy at the other end while you're setting up the broadcast. So what we need to do with it now is hook it up to the IP gear so you can talk to those people while you're setting up the broadcast. And the black phone is actually an extension on our PBX that goes through some old analog phone interface gear, a little 1-unit black panel above it, which is pretty much no longer used.
And that one is just on the PBX.
Sorry?
The one on the wall is on the PBX.
So with the black one, yeah.
No, this one right here.
Yeah, well, that's PBX, yeah, that's on the PBX.
So you actually had the Stroger switch gear hooked up and using it as a PBX?
Yeah.
For years.
And did you, how did you handle, I see you have touch-tone phones, so you built in a loader and touch-tone decoder, or?
I bought one.
You
There's
bought
There's a
one?
little card cage in the rack there, about knee-high on the right in that first frame as you go in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we've got 3 touch-tone converter cards that each handle 2 trunks, so I've got six selectors that are in service, and they each have a touch-tone decoder on it.
Okay.
How do you connect into Stanford's PBX now? It used to be.
We no longer connect
Oh, you
directly to Stanford.
Oh, you can-
Well, actually, no, I'm sorry, we connect this, it's not a PBX anymore, it's a Centrex.
Okay, but you can come in at a
So those
Trunk.
outside line interfaces are now connected to 7239010, and you know, four lines on the Stanford switch.
Oh, okay, so you're extensions of the switch effectively?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, not
Yeah.
not a selector level equivalent.
No,
Just-
back when they had the 497 office, we
Yeah.
had a selector level interface,
Yeah, that was.
two-way tie trunk.
Yeah.
But there wasn't a good way to give a selector level interface into their electronic
Yeah.
system,
Right.
at least not on the small scale that we wanted to do it.
Yeah, so if they come in on one of those extensions, they get somebody here, they can't.
I would have
dial in.
thought they would support a tie trunk interface.
Sorry?
I would have thought that they could have supported a tie trunk interface and you could have worked the antenna with that. I'm surprised.
Well, they
that you-
weren't willing to give us a tie trunk type interface to the SL100.
Yeah, must have existed.
No, it's supported though.
Must have
It's
existed.
possible, I said, I think it was like, you know, if
But
we
you would have
wanted to
ended up
have,
having to
if we
set
had
up
a
a
much
DID
larger phone
circuit.
system, they might have been willing to negotiate that, but to do 2 trunks, it wasn't worth their
No,
while.
I'm sure they didn't have any other need for it, and the amount of
Right.
common equipment to support
Yeah,
R2
it was
trunks
just more
would have
trouble
been
for them than it
ridiculous.
was worth to them.
No, they actually own the switch now and.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not, yeah.
But I was speaking, Naveen and I are supposed to go over and see what they're currently using, and I was talking to this guy, Thomas Villa Gomez, who is responsible for it.
Mm-hmm.
And he says the SL1 is still in place and serving some things, but there's something else that I didn't understand what he was talking about.
Well, they've mostly gone to voice over IP for the university
well, that doesn't
phones.
surprise me, but what's actually providing it is.
And I'm not sure what their central office hardware is that supports that.
Yeah, that's the part.
And I had
didn't
seriously
understand.
considered just going to Stanford voice over IP service when I junked the PBX. But I ran into a couple of problems. The one is we've got this call-in system, which we were just purchasing at the time. But the problem is they've sort of gone to the Bell system model of phone service, which they will own everything. We'll own your network switch, we'll own all the phones, we'll own the inside wire.
And this is the university.
The university, yeah, the university IT. And they're no longer publishing really a rate schedule. They have what they call converged communications. And what this comes down to is, tell us what you want to do. We'll go in the back room and cast some runes, and we will come up with a number. And that is what you will pay us per month for this service.
Yep.
And oh, you need to have a gigabit switch. So your 100 megabit switch just won't cut it. Even though telephones need what, 20 kilobits or something. I figure, 100 megabits will handle a fuckload of phones. And then, of course, the problem is, we'll put in the gigabit switch for you as part of this deal, but your fiber across the building to the old ECH is multi-mode fiber. It's only good for 100 megabit. So when you install single mode fiber across the building, we can do that for not to exceed $5,000. I said, well, can you support the Comrex Stack VIP that we're going to be using for call-ins on voice over IP based call-in system? Said, I'd like you guys, your engineer, to talk to Comrex's engineer, figure out if you can support this equipment, because you can't rent me one, you don't have any. I asked that question 1.5 years ago, and I've yet to receive an answer. So that's when I went to OnSIP to get this cloud voice over IP provider, which is what our new request line is. So our new request line 855-723-9010 comes into these phones, which are the new fancy Comrex one, which is their voice over IP based.
Not the 182 phones too?
What?
Not the 182 phones.
No,
too?
that's the old phone.
Okay.
It goes through the PBX and the outside line interface and the PBX, and those are going away soon. I'm just sort of having to come up with a strategy for how do I sort of pull back the old stuff while expanding the new stuff, and I'm installing some more network wiring to support the new phones. And I currently hung up on, I got a much scaled down Comrex system to use for the little news booth Studio C, and I've yet to get it to work to my complete satisfaction, and I'm still having Comrex's engineers work on the problem. I'm kind of right at the point of wanting to send it back and get my money back, but they're still trying, so I figure as long as their engineers are willing to keep poking at it, I'll let them keep poking, but yeah, I've got a phone to the transmitter that runs on our twisted pair cable, and yeah, I've actually got a voice over IP phone there too, but I need to think about I want to keep a couple of copper wire phones. I've got a phone number for engineering, 725-4867, which comes in here, and I actually send it up to the transmitter on one of our pairs using a little bridge lifter coil on this end. And I want to keep that. I want to have a couple of analog copper phone lines for when the network goes down, or OnSIP screws up our bill, or some other shit happens. Redundancy is one of the ways to help deal with it. So yeah, this is the, I find that still analog patch bays are still a good thing. It's a simple user interface. It's completely free of electrical noise and digital oddities. It's very easy to observe the state of the system.
Yes, it's intuitive.
Yeah. Like I said, that bunch of red blinking lights in the newsroom was an early attempt to do something more modern, and I found that people found it kind of daunting to use. I don't think it's that complicated, but it's not as intuitive as this. And it's certainly not as easy to see what the state of it is as this, because here I can look and see, oh, there's a patch from here to there, got it. less obvious on that system, and a system of that type in this size would cost many thousands of dollars. So this is the famous back of the racks.
Back of the rack.
More punch blocks, and the consoles are now digital. So what you think of as the console there, they call the control surface, because the thing with all the knobs and VU meters is essentially a very expensive keyboard, mouse, and monitor.
There's nothing in it.
Well, it's actually, you can actually run the console with a keyboard, mouse, and monitor.
Yeah.
The console control surface does it better, because with a control surface, you can move one fader up while you're moving another one down. You can't do that with a mouse.
See where it is, too.
Yeah, and you can see where it is. So Studio B, that's the digital signal processing and I/O cards, and that's the power supply for the control surface. Now this is the line amplifier that boosts our signal as it goes up the hill.
You send it up analog?
Yes, I'm actually also now sending it up digital. I'm about to switch over to the digital feed.
Stick your head in there.
Sure.
I've got a pair of codecs that send it up over the network.
What bandwidth are those? There's obviously special codecs for high quality audio.
Oh yeah, they're 20 kilohertz, so basically DC to daylight. So I've got the codecs installed and running. I've got a 4 in by 1 out audio switcher up there, and so the next step is two things: is to wire the switcher's controls up to our transmitter control system, so I can switch it from here, and then to rewire the audio so it goes through that switch. Because right now there's an emergency broadcast studio up there with a console, and there's a big red lever switch. You can put that local console on the air, so that will be replaced by this 4 by 1 switcher, which can be switched manually or remotely. So I will change it so that switch can select the digital feed, the analog feed, or the local console. And at that point, I'll switch us to using the digital feed as the standard thing, and the analog will be the fallback.
Hey Mark, what does the tap button on the phones do? Is that flash or?
It's flash.
It is, okay.
Yeah. Although some of our old call director phones have another thing called flash, which is the thing that lets you, I basically build, I think, what Telco calls an auxiliary trunk for those outside lines. So a call comes in on one of those outside lines through those CDHs. You could press flash on the call director to get a KZSU dial tone and route it to an extension. It turns out nobody here ever does that. There's a bit of what turns out to be engineersmanship in the way we built that stuff, because we made it do all kinds of cool things that nobody here ever bothers to do. This turns out not to be a problem unique to me and KZSU.
No.
It's just a problem with kind of every digital gadget you ever look at. Right?
Yes.
And you say, hey, we could make it do this.
Nobody really.
Which begs the
No one
question whether
wants it to
anybody
do
actually
that,
wants
right?
it, whether anybody actually cares it can
It's
do this.
also the reason why T-Systems does not have a feature
Oh, yeah.
It's too abstract for the average person.
Well, that's why we've still got the 1A2. It's a beautiful user interface. It's so simple, you can tell the state of the system at a glance.
Oh,
It's in use, it's on hold, it's ringing, it's idle.
Can dedicate buttons and label them.
Yeah, dedicated label buttons. And yeah, when Stanford first went to their electronic thing, they have these single line phones, and it's like, you can do a 3-way call, you can transfer call, and okay. If you press the button for more than a second while sticking your left thumb up your ass and rotating clockwise, it will do this. And if you put your right finger in your left ear and rotate it counterclockwise while pressing the button for less than a second, it will do that. And it's like, what?
I was a
There was a wonderful Sally Ford comic years ago where she was this office worker, and she's been sent for training for their new voicemail system or something like that, and she comes back to the training and goes, where is it? This is great. Is the system going to make our lives better? And she says, nothing that comes with a 65-page user manual is going to make our lives better.
So true.
You just take the little thing out of the 182 phones and you can conference a call. Not full quality, but it works.
We,
Good for you,
okay.
black and green.
Take time to take
Bit
the
of
stops out.
KZSU grab ass history. Back in the, before we had the PBX, we had 3 Stanford phones, extension 4000, 4001, 4002.
I remember
Yep.
those, yes.
And we modified at least one of our phones to take out the buttons that let you conference the calls. So we would amuse ourselves by calling 2 different people and connecting them together.
Yes.
And
Yes.
listening
Yes.
to the resulting conversation.
We
Right,
did that
that was
too.
Each
great.
person, of course, is certain in the knowledge that they has just answered an incoming call. It's like, hello, yes, yeah, okay. I think I remember we connected Trusted Information Desk with the Film Workshop or something. Right, Trusted Information, Film Workshop, hello, yes, can we help you? Well, you called me.
I have one of those recordings, but I cannot find it. I've got about 150 7-inch reels, and it's on one of those.
I also recall we'd connect a
We did-
couple
we
of
did this-
telephone company information operators.
Yes.
That was a little more interesting but less amusing, because of course they've all been trained exactly the same way. So it's hard to break the symmetry. So it's like information, you know, call it Portland information and LA information or something. Portland information. Information, can I help you? Well, yeah, you called me, no? Yeah, that's the, no. I called you, you called me, no, okay. Oh, that's, so this is really strange, I guess we ought to report it. Well, do you want to report it, should
Oh,
I?
yeah, that's the one.
Do you, should I? Yeah, so they're kind of doing it. Which one of us, because they're identically trained, had a lot of trouble deciding which one, had trouble breaking the symmetry, just deciding which one of them should report the problem.
They couldn't get a master-slave thing
We
going.
used to-
Finally, one of them says something, well, maybe if we pressed our so-and-so key.
We used to call competing pizzerias in the Bronx, hoping to start a blood feud.
Yes, the days where hacking was playing with telephones. But
You're a
yeah,
lot more innocent.
we tried calling the same information, you know, like, we tried calling Stanford with both lines. But they just assumed they had both answered the same call, and that the caller was just not
Double
talking to them,
connection.
so it was like, oh, we both answered the same line, which you could do, you know, if you put your plugs in at the exact same second or something,
Yep.
so. They just thought it was kind of amusing, but, you know, there was nobody there, so they hung up, and that was the end of it, so it was not so interesting, but yeah, calling 2 random, you know, or not quite random, some 2 carefully chosen Stanford numbers was entertaining.
You gotta get people who are as adversarial as possible to make it interesting.
I suppose, yeah,
Yeah,
I
we
guess
could
we
be
really
for
put some
some
thought
things,
into
too.
it, we've got to
Yeah,
come
it
up
was
with.
it was a good. Unfortunately, there weren't enough pizzerias around to do it more than once or twice, you know.
Yeah, right,
Where they caught on.
Well, how many
Call the
times
round
can you do
table
it
and
to the same
Domino's or
place?
something, right?
Right.
Well, I don't call Domino's Pizza, but that's okay.
I don't know that Domino's even qualifies.
Yeah.
Well, there's that, they're not,
You're going to
they're
the-
not on my list of,
Yeah.
actually, I don't do that much pizza these days, as it turns out, it's really bad for me. And I have to pay attention to those things these days, but, I still regard Round Table as, yes, the last honest pizza.
Oh,
You
Yeah.
know, the original
The
Round
one
Table was the one in Menlo Park.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the original Round
Many a
Table.
KZSU meal was eaten there.
I eat so little pizza
Remember
that
Bob
I
Gwynn? He
don't
used to
even know
live
where
at
the
that
Round Table
place.
Pizza in Menlo Park is. I know about
El
Applewood.
Camino up, just passed down.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was the original.
I know about the Applewood Inn, people rave about it, but I don't
It's
eat
okay.
pizza.
I like the
Slightly different thing. huh?
RTP.
The Round Table is, let's see, is it Oak Grove? No, it's a little closer. It's more like, what is the cross street?
Glenwood.
I know exactly where it is. I have trouble describing
It's
it.
1 or 2 blocks plus Santa
No,
Cruz.
Ravenswood's the one with Applewood. It's
Yeah,
where we
no,
worked at
that,
the
yeah,
Sawyer.
Ravenswood at El Camino's Applewood.
Oak Grove is the next one north.
Yeah,
Right.
mine-
Right,
Right.
I remember
Right.
exactly where the
Right.
Round Table is. It's like the 1200 block or something. Yeah, that was, I mean, that's where I was getting pizza in 1965, you know.
Oh, the Oasis is gone.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is it?
Not there
So
anymore.
that is so outrageous.
Yeah.
Could not reach a lease agreement with the landlord.
What's replacing it?
That happens a lot.
Nothing
yet because the landlord is being an asshole. He
Well, the
decided
thing
he
that
was a
gets me
landlord.
is these
So this is
landlords,
Yeah.
Oh,
they
yeah,
kick
just
out
like
a
the last
business
few
that's been
months.
running years and years and paying their
After all these years.
I used to
Paying
go.
their
rent
for years.
forever, and then the thing is
Well,
vacant. How much
Franklin
money are they
Health
losing,
Department
and
made
they
money
might
off
not
all
even
the
get a
connections.
good tenant?
But the
Well,
attitude
rural
of
is
the
gone.
person that greedy is,
Yeah.
I'll make it
Yeah.
up on the next 10
And
minutes.
that
Yeah.
building is
Entirely
historic, so
Yeah.
they
And then there
may,
was,
they may not be able to build something fancy
Yeah,
and expensive
yeah.
there without years of
That's
litigation.
interesting,
I'm
but
confused.
I've
There was
seen
one
so much bulldozed in
on-
Menlo Park.
Well, but in
Yeah.
Palo Alto, yeah. but-
Especially along El Camino.
Yeah, but mostly not
One-
stuff that's
Where
historic.
was
I
the
mean, that
Dutch
has been
Goose?
there since
Oh, the Goose, but
1933.
that's up on Alameda.
That's
Oh,
good.
All right,
The
so
Oasis
that's what I was
is
On
thinking.
Alameda
That's still
Road.
there?
isn't it?
Sorry?
The Oasis is in
still
Menlo
own it.
Park.
Yeah.
It's not in Palo Alto.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
Well,
so.
I
haven't
know
been
in
there
Palo
for a
Alto,
while.
there's this business on Alma Street and about Forest maybe, or Hamilton. It was like a craft store or something, and it closed because the landlord, was doubling the rent. And that building sat vacant for about 3 years.
Yeah,
Okay, Mr. Greedy landlord, how much money did you make on that?
yeah, yeah.
Um,
And the thing is too, if you've got a good tenant, that's worth more than the raise in the rent.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Landlords are too greedy to realize that.
Until they leave the state.
Well, some are, some aren't. I mean, now we got this silly rent control thing going on in Mountain View.
Yeah.
And the good landlords who thought that way now can't raise their rents
Yeah.
when people leave, so they're sort of screwed.
Yeah.
Is there rent control on commercial rent now?
No, it's just on
Residential?
on residential.
Rental.
Yeah.
And pre-Costa Hawkins residents.
Yeah.
The whole thing is completely arbitrary.
Well, so the latest issue in Palo Alto is the President Apartments.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It originally was a hotel. It was converted into residential apartments many, many years ago.
Oh, yeah, the president of the.
Yeah, and
University.
so it's now kind of moderate income housing. So it just got sold to a boutique hotel developer who wants to turn it back into a hotel and make it
Boutique
pricey.
hotel.
Boutique.
Well, it turns out they can't because the zoning doesn't allow a hotel there, and the current code for hotels would require they have appropriate parking for the number of tenants. And the building has no parking. And so there's density and parking and zoning, there's like 3 or 4 different ways they can't make that into a boutique
But what's the
hotel.
status of the Cardinal?
But they're
The
busy
Cardinal's not
trying
very far
to
away.
evict the
That
tenants.
changed, first,
Is the Cardinal not a hotel anymore?
I don't know
Cardinal
about
was
the
one for low rent people, and then it turned into a hotel. Yeah.
Really? I have no idea. I just assumed it was a
There was
hotel
at least
all along.
one that had been low-income housing up in
Yeah.
a hotel. Well, the city's become, there's a lot of talk about affordable housing, and, it's a comprehensive plan, we should go build more affordable housing, and not lose what we have. And then the big issue a couple of years ago was this trailer park.
Yeah.
When this, I guess,
When it
trailer
was
park.
down El Camino.
Because the owners wanted to sell it and, develop it into condos or something like that. And saying, wait a minute, we've got like 100 units of affordable housing here. Like 400 people living there. And if you throw those people out, basically they'll be forced out of the area. I mean, there's no place,
Your kids are going to school here.
there's
They're
no
gonna get-
place for them to live
Yeah.
at those prices, so relocation assistance
Yeah.
doesn't really cut it because we'll relocate to where? Fresno, And so they ended up that the county or this like nonprofit or government housing authority bought
The
it.
city and the county may have gotten together.
Yeah, because they were basically ready to use eminent domain, to stop this, because people realized it's absurd for us to talk about affordable housing, we're building maybe 8 units a year, and we're gonna trash 100. It's like this is the last 10 years' progress in affordable housing flushed away, in an instant. And so this has become an issue for the President Hotel as well, but it turns out that buyers apparently talked to somebody in the city government at the time and got the feeling that they could do this conversion.
Oops.
And now that they bought it and started evicting people, of course, that's when, because of course that was under the radar, right? It's like somebody talks to somebody in the city, residents don't know about it, the city, voters don't know about it, and then all of a sudden they start mailing people eviction notices, everybody starts saying, wait a minute, what the hell's going on? why are you throwing me out of my home? Oh, because we're gonna turn it into an expensive hotel room. Well, no, you're not. And so that's when this blew up, and the city council is now talking, what can they do to save these units? And they haven't decided on a course of action yet, because it's one thing, it's pretty easy for the city to say you can't make it into a hotel, but that doesn't help the people who are getting evicted if the landlords decide they're gonna empty it first. You know, you may be able to sort of save it, but too late for any of the people who are in it. And they may have to, you know, condemn it and buy it, or, you know, they're looking at emergency ordinances for renter protection, but that's, you know, a whole bunch of other issues. You can start talking about renter protection. Of course, the classic problem with rent control is it doesn't, you can prevent isolated injustices of people being thrown out without good cause, for example, but you can't really protect people from the market forces. And if you force a bunch of landlords to basically rent their units at below what they're worth, you end up stifling new construction, and you end up at some point stifling maintenance of the stuff that's there.
With abandoned buildings.
Well, that's what we had in Mountain
Landlords
View.
walk away.
Right, and you end up with abandoned buildings. That's what's happened in some cities. I mean, so it's.
Yeah, the week after the landlords' initiative to repeal the rent control law failed, we had an owner of a building, and sadly it was a local owner who had apparently been fairly good, realized he could not raise the money to renovate the place and get a reasonable return on it, so he sold out to some outside developers who will come back with minimum affordable housing, and at the end of the day we'll have less than we had.
Where in Mountain View? What part of Mountain View is subject to this problem? Certainly not areas like where you are.
Well, no, because it's all single-family housing.
Right,
But
so where is it, downtown?
El Camino and a couple of blocks south to El Camino, all the way north is
You
the
know,
rental.
I got here by crossing El Camino at University Avenue and turning south, thinking of parking on University Avenue. Ultimately didn't do that. But there, as well as along Park Boulevard on the portion going down to Fry's, it's just endless recreational vehicles.
Sure.
that
Oh,
are
yeah,
always
that's
there.
our low-cost housing.
They now have to move them every few days. It used
All
to
over
be.
the place.
Oh, yeah, we have it, Shoreline Boulevard,
El Camino right in front of Stanford.
the park, Ringsdorf Park, what's that street called? It's just wall to wall, basically derelict Winnebagos.
They're not all derelict. Some of them are very nice and they have good accessories on the back. Like, it's just.
Some of them
We
have,
profiled
some of
an
them are, but-
electrician that was working here at Stanford University making $100,000 a year and couldn't afford an apartment. He
Yeah.
was living in an RV in El Camino.
Yeah, because he couldn't find any place to live.
Right.
That's absolutely true. But we also have a lot of entrepreneurs who bought up derelict RVs and rent them out to other people.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So the city actually finally hired a septic service to go around and pump them out once a week, so
Hey,
they
that's
came
a-
all over the place.
Well, they're
It's a good
supposed to
business.
move every
Hazard.
3 days in Palo Alto, I think.
Yeah, Palo Alto
That's
made
the
you
state
move,
law,
yeah.
but doesn't enforce that.
Well, but they put up these strange signs about a month ago next to the Target store in Mountain View on that first street.
Oh, on
between
Showers?
No, between it and El Camino, on that side. And it says no vehicles over 6 feet high may park on this side of the street.
that's
I wonder
new.
what kind of legal basis they had to, like, we have a pickup truck that's taller than 6 feet.
No
Well,
vehicles
part of the
that are
problem was
red or
people were
blue or.
parking
On a
too close to
city
the
street,
corners and
cities
blocking
have-
the
This had
sidelines.
nothing to do with this.
Well,
That may have been the rationale.
People.
But on a city street, the cities have pretty broad authority to regulate parking. See, El Camino is a state highway, so
But
in
even,
most
But
cases,
why
the city
say
doesn't have
even
the.
there are signs that say no parking 8 to 5, certain days, like 6 days out of the year. It's like 6
Football
specific
days.
days.
That could be park. That could be street.
I-
It's football days.
I think,
Yeah.
I assumed it
But
was
they had to
football
get
days.
Caltrans approval to do that.
I would assume so, yes.
Berkeley shuts down.
But I've
entire
never seen a
streets
sign
on
like that
weekdays.
before,
Well,
I mean, I never.
I don't know why, they never win.
I'm in Menlo Park, and they have a rule, basically no overnight parking. And so our residential areas don't have this clutter of cars all around them, which I like, is very good. I mean, it's,
Like from 2 a.m. to something.
yeah, it's some magic, and there's a
2 to
guy
5
that
or
moved in
something.
across
Are you
the
gonna do
street.
that?
Yeah.
Okay,
I think
good.
he's
Got an
parking,
extra as
he's
far
new,
as
he's renting a house that people had moved out.
The
And
basic problem with the overnight parking thing is it basically says for most people, no overnight visitors, which I think is an unreasonable intrusion on the.
Well,
A lot of places that don't have
You can-
signage either.
in Menlo, you can get a temporary permit.
there were no signs in that effect.
Well, 50 years ago, I got a ticket in Palo Alto for parking overnight on the street, and I fought it. The city didn't show up to prosecute it, so I won my case by default. And eventually, the problem was it actually violated the vehicle code, because the vehicle code said that any city parking restrictions had to be posted on the affected streets, and this no parking overnight was not
Yeah.
posted on the city streets. And then the cities managed to get the vehicle code amended so that they're allowed to prohibit overnight parking without individual signage, but I think that's basically a step in the wrong direction. If you're gonna prohibit parking, you gotta post signs telling people what the rules are.
Yeah, that's completely unfair.
Well, like he was talking Menlo, it's some magic thing, like from 1 to 4 a.m. you are allowed to park, which gets rid of most.
I think it's
but-
later than 1, actually.
But, yeah, but there's a guy across the street, I was just explaining, it's just, he must work nights, because his truck's always on the street, and I hear him leave at 5 in the morning, you know, and he's gone and comes back. So, I mean, the intent of the law is to keep the streets from being cluttered, and he's meeting the rule of the law, but he's parking most of the time.
They started putting up a bunch of residential parking only places in Southgate, kind of College Terrace.
Yeah.
And it's
Right,
just-
because the problem has
yeah.
been overflow from downtown.
But it's gone way past downtown. I live in Southgate, and it's we don't have a problem for that. And they started putting all these signs every 10 feet, 20 feet, and it's just cluttering everything up. Everyone has to buy a permit. You get like one free
Oh, the
permit.
parking.
Yeah, and $50, $60 a permit, and basically no visitors anymore.
Well, what was it they said about Watergate? Follow the money.
I have signs on my street from when late from the train was on the corner, because people on the weekends would not bother to go into the parking lot for late for the train, so they would park down my block. So the city came along and put up signs to restrict parking during the day on my side of the street. And late for the train is long gone. It's an office building now.
Have to-
You know?
And the signs are still there, right?
And the signs are still there, yeah. I should get a pipe cutter and do it.
Take them down and see if they put them back up.
That's right.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
be careful, look what it did for Cool Hand Luke.
Yeah, I don't know what it did.
You never saw Cool Hand Luke? Oh my God.
Not recently enough to remember.
What he got arrested for was cutting off parking meters.
Ah.
He was drunk and he was in some parking lot, and he's got his pipe cutter out, starts cutting the heads of all the parking meters.
There was a kid who came around NYU radio station, who insisted that he had keys to parking meters. And he had a parking meter route, and he would go around emptying parking
You had to have a
meters.
little chute to pick the money
And
that
of
comes
course,
off.
nobody believed him, but a few years later, it was in the news that this sort of thing was happening, so.
Well, the will, there's a way.
So, rather than remove them, he was much more creative.
Yeah, don't remove them, milk them.
Exactly.
Harvest, yes.
But yeah, you get caught doing that, they're pretty mean to you.
I would suppose so.
Stealing from the city, they don't like people horning in on their rackets.
So the thing that's always gets you is these people, you know, where you have to top meters up, and the city will fine you if you don't. These good Samaritans come around and top people's meters up, and they say that's illegal.
Yeah.
Yes.
They want a ticket.
Feeding the meter,
They
right?
want you to move.
Yeah.
They want to give you a ticket.
Even though you're allowed to park X hours, but the meter had run out, and the guy was topping it up, but, yeah. The other one that gets me though is, what are you renting? 'Cause why can't 2 motorcycles park in a car space? I mean, the whole idea of some cases, now you've got the smarts, the little short cars, you wanna be able to park 2 of those.
Well, I remember at one point seeing a thing in the paper where some city was cracking down on multiple motorcycles in a space, so the motorcyclists did a protest. They came into town, a whole shitload of motorcycles.
One motorcycle for every
Parked
spot.
one per space, like the law requires, so like, careful what you wish for, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, wouldn't you rather, I mean, if you're trying to make parking available,
Yeah, ride a
you
motorcycle,
wanna say,
save space.
have several motorcycles share space rather than having each take up rather than having waste space, so yeah, just.
Should define it as you rent, 1 meter rents that space, and whatever you put in there is fair game.
Yeah. Well, it's like typically the idea of parking meters is not so much a revenue thing as a parking turnover thing.
Yeah.
You're
So you don't.
trying to avoid having people park there all day.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's often done because the merchants want the spaces available for customers. And they don't want their employees or, others just park there the whole damn day and tie up the space because then nobody can come in and spend money in the store.
Yeah, and eventually they'll just say, I'm not gonna shop in downtown Palo Alto because there's no place to park.
Yeah, Menlo
Well,
Park
that's
is-
why Palo Alto no longer has parking meters.
We built a bunch of structures.
Well,
10 years
Stanford
ago.
Shopping Center forced the elimination of Palo Alto's parking meters. Because you can go to the shopping center and park for free. And so if people had to pay to park in University Avenue and they park at the shopping center for free,
Yeah, I guess
there
the
goes your
mer-
business.
Yeah, I guess the merchants kind
Yeah, but you were saying that the parking garages in Palo Alto work pretty well.
of, now, I read recently, with the demise of Max's Opera Cafe, not a place that I ever actually went to, that, the Stanford Shopping Center was sold by Stanford to a mall operator owner named the Simon Group. Now, I thought Stanford owned the land. Did they
Oh, they
sell?
do.
I think they contracted out.
Did
Yeah, they
sell it?
contracted
Every-
out.
even,
Sublease it, they can't sell the
Newspaper
land.
article said sold.
That's
I don't think
incorrect.
that's,
The
they would
founding
never
grant
sell it.
wouldn't let them.
Ever sell it.
Yeah, 'cause
I-
even-
I-
Grant
I couldn't
does not
imagine
allow
that they
Stanford to
would,
sell land.
but,
Yeah.
certain businesses were closed down by the new operator because the new operator wanted companies that are advertised nationally. So there was an independent coffee roaster in there whose lease was not
Yeah.
renewed and things like that,
Well, Stanford owns like Ladera. If you buy a house, you've got to rent the land
Really?
from Stanford, a 99-year lease or something.
Wow.
I've owned a couple in, the Southgate neighborhood.
I actually very rarely shop at the Stanford Shopping
Oh,
Center.
I-
It's become so boutique-ified.
Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
not worth it.
I go to Segona's.
I think I did go to the
Still
Apple
there.
store there a while ago, and
The Radio Shack's long gone before even Radio Shack.
well, when that was first opened back in the '60s and '50s, there was a five and dime. There's a Woolworths.
Where are you talking about?
Stanford Shopping Center.
Still, it had to leave.
There was a Woolworths.
There was,
There was a
you said?
Purity supermarket.
There was.
I remember
Yeah,
the
there
Woolworths.
was. There's a little soup place called Sandy's Kitchen. There was a hardware store, Early's Hardware.
Wow,
These basic downtown stores.
yes.
But over the years it became boutique-ified, and now we got places like Banana
Tesla
Republic
dealers.
and well, there's a Tesla dealer. I'm not sure. I think it's kind of cool that there's a Tesla dealer in there, 2 doors down from the Apple store. So it's our high-tech stuff.
One-stop shopping.
But there's so many of these little, I call them boutique-y places. Small place with overpriced
Well,
stuff.
I always perceived the Stanford Shopping Center as being overpriced, so I never went there.
Oh, yeah, it's,
Well, I said back in the day when it had, Early's Hardware and Purity Market and,
Right. It didn't
there's
start
a
out
hardware
that way.
store, and a drugstore and a five and dime, but those places are long gone.
Well, it had one other huge benefit when we were students, which was all the merchants at Stanford Shopping Center would take your checks if you showed them a Stanford ID, because they could go back to the registrar's office and prevent you from graduating if you
oh, yeah,
bounced a check on
put a
them.
hold on
That's
And
interesting.
most merchants on university did not have that policy, so there was a huge benefit to shopping at Stanford.
Oh, yeah, back in the old days when I had to worry about merchants taking our check.
you.
All right, hey, in loco parentis, I mean, it had some benefits.
It's been a long time since I did that.
Mark, I think we're gonna have to go, but thank you so much for
You're welcome.
showing us
Yeah,
around.
indeed.
Haven't seen it for so long, it's, hard to remember.
Hard to believe, hard to believe.
Yeah. Anyway, see you guys.
Yeah.
Is that a legal use for a?
Oh, yeah, Mark,
Thanks very much, Mark.
Look at that, yeah.
Well, this is kind of a new snap-in style, though. It's
Oh.
very nice.
That snap-in style is for the little.
Yeah,
Narrow
66
box.
M's, yeah. Although somebody seems
I
to
never
have
liked the
carved it a little bit.
66 M's because only had 2 tabs
Yeah,
per side, and
yeah.
I like to connect multiple
Well,
things.
there were
Well,
there were
you-
25
25s, yeah, you can get a 60 M125 for
Right, yeah,
distribution.
25
I don't
there.
like, what is it, the other one that you have to put, what is the 100? The other,
The 110.
110.
110s and
88s.
Crohn's and,
I don't like those because you can't connect clip on them and you can't, you know.
No, I have test
Well, the
boards of
110s
Yeah,
were
there
the
are some.
handle
I have
network
some.
stuff, so like my network jacks, the jacks themselves and the patch bays are all 110 type
Right.
yeah.
terminations, because the basically thinking of this twisted pair as a transmission line that has to handle radio frequencies, which
Yep.
you're talking about 300 megahertz data rates as radio frequencies. You care about the balance and the
Oh, yeah.
constant impedance, and the 66B type blocks fail miserably in terms of constant impedance. So you spot one of those things on a time domain reflectometer pretty
Yeah.
easily.
You're talking, because what is it, they came out with they were paired and then paired, they were
Yeah,
separated, not
unevenly
evenly.
spaced.
Yeah, they were,
I don't know how much it improves that,
Yeah,
but that was the
yeah.
purpose.
Well, it's supposed to have different resonances, and it probably works out. I still use it, you know, in
the
my
twist
little
on
railroad phone
Cat
systems, because it's
5
what's
or something,
handy.
you run that, the twist on the cable is amazingly tight, it's
Yeah.
uniform.
Yeah, it takes forever to twist. I wish I
That
could just get some
stuff
Cat
in there is
3.
all twisted pair shielded?
Sorry?
That orange and yellow stuff in there is all twisted pair shielded?
Yes. That's a
But it's not.
Belden shielded pair. Yeah.
That's what Belden foil cable looks like these days?
You can still get the old gray
So I've
stuff.
never-
You can still get the gray stuff, the 8450. Yeah.
8451 or 8450.
Yeah, what I liked about these is they're easy stripping the shield, because if you cut with like a wire stripper designed for about number 12 wire, you can cut through the jacket and the shield
I do exactly the same thing.
and strip the jacket and shield off together,
Just the
preserving
strain
the drain
wire.
wire.
Yeah.
But the problem is this stuff is stranded, which is
Oh,
not ideal for punch box.
No.
Although the 22 stranded conductors seem to work quite well in a 66
But there was a
box.
solid version, I think 8450 was the solid.
But it doesn't have that same stripping
Oh, it
characteristic.
doesn't?